All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be looking at a battle that, on paper, looks like a clear loss for the United States, but history tells a completely different story. This is the incredible tale of the Battle of the Coral Sea and how a tactical defeat turned out to be one of the most important strategic victories of the entire Second World War.
What you're looking at here is the American aircraft carrier, the USS Lexington, literally being torn apart by massive explosions. This was a huge, undeniable loss. And yet, this exact moment is part of a battle that helped turn the tide of the war in the Pacific. So, how is that even possible? Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the really desperate early months of 1942.
In early 1942, the Empire of Japan just seemed absolutely invincible. Their advance across the Pacific was like this unstoppable force of nature, and it was heading straight for a critical breaking point for the Allies. I mean, just look at the sheer speed and scale of this conquest. In just a few short months after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces had literally stormed across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. We're talking the Philippines, the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, the so-called Fortress of Singapore. They all fell. For the Allies, it must have felt like a relentless, unstoppable tide was just washing over them.
And this map shows exactly what their next big move was. The Japanese High Command greenlit something called Operation MO, and the goal was simple: invade Port Moresby in New Guinea. If they captured it, they wouldn't just secure their defensive line, they'd be able to bomb northern Australia and, maybe most importantly, cut the vital supply lines between the United States and its biggest ally in the region.
So yeah, the situation looked incredibly bleak for the Allies, but the U.S. Navy had an ace up its sleeve, a secret weapon that the Japanese had no idea even existed, and this advantage would change everything before a single shot was even fired.
And that weapon wasn't a ship or a plane. It was intelligence. For years, this brilliant team of codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii had been chipping away at the super-complex Japanese naval code, a cipher known as JN-25B. Basically, they were listening to everything the Japanese Navy was saying. And their success was just staggering. By late April of 1942, they were able to read up to 85% of the Japanese Navy's most secret communications. Think about that. It's like having your opponent's playbook before the game even starts. So what this created was this massive information gap. The Japanese were operating under the belief that the American carriers were thousands of miles away in the Central Pacific. They were totally in the dark that a trap was being set. Meanwhile, the U.S. commander, Admiral Nimitz, he knew everything: the Japanese targets, their timeline, the forces involved. So he immediately sent two of his carrier task forces, the Lexington and the Yorktown, racing down to the Coral Sea to set up an ambush.
All right, so the trap is set. And what happens next wasn't just another naval clash. No, this was something brand new. This was a fundamental shift in how war was fought at sea. This quote really says it all. This is what makes the Battle of the Coral Sea so historic. For the first time in history, the big capital ships of the opposing fleets, they never even saw each other. They never fired their massive guns at one another. The entire battle was fought from hundreds of miles away by carrier aircraft completely over the horizon.
Now, the battle itself was a really confusing, messy, two-day affair. On May 7th, both sides kind of messed up, launching airstrikes that hit secondary ships instead of the main enemy carriers. The Americans did get the first big score, though, finding and sinking the Japanese light carrier, the Shoho. But the next day, May 8th, the main fleets finally found each other, and it was just a brutal exchange. The Japanese carrier, Shikaku, was badly damaged, the U.S. carrier Yorktown got hit, and the Lexington took a real beating.
And right in the middle of all this chaos, you get these incredible human moments. After his squadron helped sink the Shoho, a U.S. pilot named Robert E. Dixon radioed this famously simple and triumphant message back to the fleet: "Scratch one flat top." It was a huge morale boost.
But that triumph was pretty short-lived. The Lexington, one of America's few precious fleet carriers, was burning out of control. The damage was just too severe, and eventually the heartbreaking order was given to abandon ship and scuttle her, to sink their own ship on purpose. For the U.S. Navy, this was an absolutely devastating blow.
So this brings us right to the central question of this whole thing. If the Americans lost a massive fleet carrier and the Japanese only lost a much smaller, light carrier, who actually won? The scorecard is, to put it mildly, confusing.
If you're just looking at the raw numbers, at the immediate results, then yeah, it was a tactical victory for Japan, no doubt about it. They sank more important ships and lost fewer men. In a traditional fight, they won the engagement.
And this table here really spells it out. The U.S. lost a 40,000-ton fleet carrier, the most powerful type of warship on the planet at the time.
Japan lost a much, much smaller 14,000-ton light carrier. And yeah, Japan lost more aircraft, but losing a fleet carrier like the Lexington was a far, far greater material blow to the Allied war effort.
So here it is, the big paradox. How on earth can a battle where you lose one of your most powerful, most important warships possibly be considered a victory? Well, the answer has nothing to do with the ships that were sitting at the bottom of the ocean, and everything to do with what happened next.
To understand the real outcome, we have to zoom out. We have to look past the Coral Sea to find the battle's true, hidden, and absolutely critical strategic impact. And that all leads us to the Battle of Midway.
Okay, so here's the absolute key to the whole thing. The goal of the U.S. fleet was not to win a naval duel. The goal was to stop Operation MO. And the real victory wasn't measured in sunken ships, but in achieving that strategic goal.
And the strategic results were immense. First, the invasion of Port Moresby, it was called off. Australia was safe. Second, and this is huge, for the first time since Pearl Harbor, a major Japanese offensive was stopped cold. The tide had been checked. But here's the most important part. The two Japanese fleet carriers that fought at Coral Sea, the Shokaku and the Zukaku, they were taken off the board. The Shokaku was heavily damaged and needed months of repairs, and the Zukaku had lost so many planes and experienced pilots that its air group was basically useless. This meant that just 1 month later, at the absolutely decisive Battle of Midway, the Japanese Navy was missing two of its very best aircraft carriers.
And that leaves us with this final thought. The American victory at Midway is famously called the turning point of the entire Pacific War. But it was a victory that was won by the absolute narrowest of margins. So the question is, could that decisive victory have even happened if those two Japanese carriers hadn't been knocked out of the fight during the so-called defeat at the Coral Sea? It really shows you that sometimes the most important victories are the ones hidden inside a loss.